Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. As always, I'm your host. Wham's here. Kevin writes me a script. I read it. We've never read it before. That's the format of the show. This is Wallace Souza and Canal Livre. Murder for ratings. Oh my god, I remember when Kevin pitched this to me. This one's insane. This one's it. If I remember this right, Kevin said that there was basically some dude who hosted a true crime show and he basically murdered, or he had people murdered, or he murdered people so he could then talk about the crimes on the air, which is definitely something I've never done. Why would I do that for ratings and exclusive coverage? Oh, God. I haven't really. I mean, obviously. Is it? Have I? Who knows? How far would you go for ratings, Simon? Apparently. I'm not this far, dude. Killing someone's really intense. I would know. I'm obviously not talking about tailoring certain aspects of your content to better play into YouTube's algorithm either. I mean, if push came to shove, what would you really be capable of? I think I personally would be capable of quite a lot in the correct situation, but in order to improve my ratings or for financial gain, I don't think so. I just don't care about it enough to actually do anything that serious. But I don't know, if someone was kidnap my children, I'd be like, I've got a very special set of skills, and then I'd murder them and their families.
Are you okay?
Just joking, I'd just murder them. I wouldn't murder their families. That would be crazy. Think about it. We make true crime content on this channel, but while we have occasionally covered cases while they were just making headlines, most of these stories are old enough that others have already made books, documentaries, or YouTube videos about them as well. That doesn't mean that any of you should stop watching, though, because I guarantee we do it better than anyone else. Not a guarantee. Thanks, Kevin. But we do. Not a guarantee. But what if there's a different way to handle true crime content? What if we were able to exclusively cover breaking stories before the police even had time to investigate the crime scene? That certainly sounds like a recipe for success and the kind of channel our morbid viewers would absolutely enjoy. I mean, how would this work? Hi everyone, welcome back to The Casual Criminalist. Last night I murdered someone called Peter. Here's how it went down. Now, you probably noticed that there is an obvious problem with this business model. How on earth are we supposed to know about murders before the police do? So I ask you again, Simon, how far would you be willing to go for ratings? Would you kill a man? No chance. I'd just be like, you know what channel doesn't if you listen to this podcast, I said this is a YouTube channel. I've got a few other YouTube channels. There's plenty of channels I do which don't require murder. So I just do those channels instead. Of course not. You'd pay me or one of your other writers to do it for you. I recommend Blind Dave because who's going to suspect the blind guy of being a contract killer? Wait, what's that movie with the blind dude? Is it Daredevil? Yeah, it's Daredevil, where he's blind and he's a badass. He's clicking through the phone and he hears stuff, right? Is that Daredevil or is that Batman? I feel like that might be Batman. I'm just getting all my superhero movies confused because I don't care about superhero movies. Here we go. The Law and Order candidate. There's not a lot of information about the early life of Wallace Souza, including in the Portuguese sources I could find. He was born in Manaus, the capital city of the Brazilian state of Amazonas, which is located on the banks of the Amazon River. No just upstream from its confluence with the Rio Negro. This section is called the Meeting of Waters in Brazil because the dark waters of the Rio Negro and the sandy waters of the upper Amazon run alongside each other for several kilometers. That detail isn't actually important to the story. I just think it's wild that there's a chunk of Amazon River that looks like an unshaken bottle of vinaigrette. Yeah, it's kind of cool, isn't it? Wait, they're running alongside each other, as in they're not in different channels. They're actually next to each other in the same thing. They just haven't mixed together properly. That is kind of wild. Not as wild as murdering people for the success of your true crime content, but I mean, still pretty wild. If murdering people for your true crime content's a 7, then the river thing's a 6, Kev. Maybe a 6.5. After high school, Wallace earned his first degree at the São Luís Gonzaga Commercial College and a second at Barcelona Machado State College in Sao Paulo. He studied theology and philosophy at, I like how there's been a typo here, and it's corrected Sao Paulo to Sao Paula. I also get the same when I type places. It's did you mean this? No, how do you not know Sao Paulo? I don't know, for me it's Apple Notes or whatever. It's come on. He also studied theology and philosophy at the Center for the Study on Human Behavior, though he did not earn another degree there. Instead, it was time for Wallace to enter the workforce. What kind of job would you expect a 21-year-old with a degree in business, theology, and philosophy to seek out? If you guessed police officer. Wait, what was his things again? Business, theology, and philosophy? No, not what I'd guess. You're both correct and probably cheating, because there's no way that should have been anyone's first guess based on his educational background. But it was a good job, and presumably a very busy one. Manaus is notoriously dangerous. It's regarded by Brazilians as the country's most dangerous state capital, and according to the statistics, it is the second or third most dangerous city in the entire country. The murder rate is exceptionally high, falling just shy of being in the top 20 highest murder rates in the entire world. Wait, is Brazil so dangerous? It's the second or third most dangerous city in the entire country, and it's in the top 20. So that implies like 3 of the top 20 cities are in Brazil. Whoa. Over half of the cities with high murder rates are all in Mexico. Well, okay, then it doesn't sound so bad, does it? Though New Orleans and Baltimore also appear to be more deadly than Manaus. Really? Baltimore? What's in Baltimore? Just like how the rates of violent crime in Mexico are largely attributable to the cartels, the crime in Manaus seems to be fueled by gangs of drug traffickers as well. In short, there should have been no shortage of work for Wallace to do during his time as a police officer. It kept him busy for a good 8 years, long enough to get married and have the first of his 4 children, but in 1987 his time with the police department would come to an end. Of course, that wasn't actually Wallace's decision. He was fired after being arrested for pension fraud and stealing gasoline. Bruh. Don't be stealing gas if you're a police officer, because not only are you going to get in trouble for stealing gas, if you've got a criminal record, you're not going to be a police officer anymore, are you? It's a big risk. It's unclear what the scale of either of these crimes was, particularly the gas theft, but obviously committing crimes is a good way to lose your job as an officer of the law. Kevin and I, same page. Or at least it should be. But let's not pretend that corruption isn't a thing. No. Yeah. If they find you, if you get caught out, then of course you're going to lose your job as a police officer. Maybe, probably. If you get caught publicly. But, to be fair, Wallace was reinstated to the force after the investigation concluded, and I guess he was found to have not been guilty, but that didn't happen until 2009. What? Wasn't this 1987? So it's not like he actually went back to the job. The fact that it happened in 2009 is more than a little ironic for reasons that will become apparent later. Also, holy shit, I thought the American legal system moved slowly, but that's insane. Following his time with the police, Wallace got into broadcasting. He started as a radio presenter on Radio Tropical Cidade, 93.3 FM. I can't pin down exactly when this began, but he also started teaching law at Nilton Lins University, Manaus. Wait, he doesn't have a background in law at all. He did a degree that wasn't related to being a cop, and then he became a cop. Okay. While I don't know if this is before or after he started his TV show, it's definitely well before he was reinstated to the force. That means someone actively chose to hire a disgraced former cop to teach law at their university, which is certainly a decision you are allowed to make, I suppose. Yeah. It sounds like that's the university that Saul Goodman would go to. But where this story really begins and the details start to come into focus is with Wallace's 1996 TV show Espaço Livre, or Free Space. The show was essentially a pulpit from which Wallace would sermonize about how inefficient public officials were and their failures to keep the people of Manaus safe from the violence that plagued the streets. While Wallace did give a lot of his own opinions, at its core, Espaço Livre was a crime show filled with Wallace's own investigative journalism. The show was successful, and in 1996, the same year it began, he ran for councillor of Manaus. He received only 898 votes, falling tens of thousands of votes short of what he would have needed. Not popular enough, though. There's that. It's so insane how that guy, there's that YouTuber who's now the member of European Parliament for Cyprus. Just because he's famous. He's famous enough. He just runs for it. And he just gets all his fans to vote for him. And now he's a member of the European Parliament. Like, what the hell? The format for the show wasn't going to last, however. In the Brazilian state of Parana, the local station, Red AOM, had made some big moves, and in the early 1990s, it became the first nationally broadcast network that wasn't based in Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo. One of their most notable programs was Programa do Ratinho. It was hosted by Carlos Massa, and the show's name came for his nickname, Ratinho, or Little Mouse. It sounds like he's Little Rat, which sounds a lot worse than Little Mouse. Little Rat. It was a primetime show, and it was sort of all over the place. There were police reports, talent shows, musical numbers, paternity tests, and whatever the hell else they felt like doing. Programa do Ratinho was immensely popular. I don't know, it's a variety show, essentially. People are tuning in for everything and nothing. I'm so surprised this works, I guess, is kind of what I'm thinking. Often hitting #1 in the ratings during its time slot. It was so popular that in 1998, games played for the Mercosur Cup, an international soccer tournament in South America at the time, were preempted for Ratinho's show, with only the second half of the games being aired. No, I used to hate it when I was a kid, and he'd be like, yes, but, 6:45 on a Thursday or whatever is going to be my favorite TV show, Star Trek The Next Generation. And he'd be like, and just to our usual viewers tuning in, please note that Star Trek The Next Generation is cancelled this week because we're watching snooker. Who the f*** watches snooker? Why? Wallace looked at the success of the show and basically said, fuck straight journalism, let's do that instead, starting in 1998. Yeah, I mean, I get it, dude, because you, make all this effort, you're doing, a serious show, and someone else is like, hey, are you the dad? Jerry! And they're enormously successful. Like, I could do that, and I wouldn't even have to try that hard. What the fuck? Starting in 1998, Exposé Livre was rebranded as Canal Livre, or Free Channel. Instead of just being his personal soapbox like the original version, Canal Livre became a variety show very similar to Programa de Ratino. It featured musical acts, a puppet named Galarito, and reports of crimes going on in the city. The show quickly skyrocketed in popularity, becoming the most watched afternoon show by far, with nearly all of Manaus watching Canal Livre during their lunch breaks. But Wallace took everything Programa de Ratino was doing and ramped up the intensity to extreme levels, which is a good plan. See something successful, do it better. Or do it more extreme, I suppose.
That's extreme, man!
Instead of just talking about police reports, Wallace began following police to active crime scenes. Dude, in the early days, the entire crew only contained a few people, and Wallace was the only reporter. He would venture out in his car to follow police as they performed drug raids that resulted in shootouts between traffickers and the cops, putting himself in the line of fire. He would also film murder victims whose bodies hadn't been covered up by investigators yet. Bro, how is that okay to air on television? They would broadcast videos of bodies that were riddled with bullet holes and bleeding out in the streets, and this was all totally acceptable by Brazilian daytime TV standards, I guess, which is insane. Family members of the victims were often present at these scenes, which gave Wallace the opportunity to interview them as well. Dude, what are you doing? This is so distasteful. And look, we're making an episode about a dude who had a true crime show and then did crimes to feature on his true crime show, but I mean, shit, dude, really? But it wasn't all about violence or puppets. Wallace wanted to help people, and he would help them directly on his show. Rather than recording the show in an empty studio like he did for Exposé Livre, Canal Livre was filmed in front of a live studio audience of about 50 people, again copying Ratinho. Wallace did something new though. People would come on his show asking for things like food or tires. Okay. What do you like? You had like a hot dog and some Goodyear 19-inch... I don't know how tires work. And he would give them what they needed. Well, it was mostly his sponsors who did, but Wallace was still the face of these philanthropic efforts, and it was likely his idea as well. This was fantastic, both for ratings and for Wallace's personal popularity. It's a bit reminiscent of when I wrote about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. Sure, he was a deranged, narcissistic cult leader, but he also provided real, tangible help to people rather than just asking them to pray to God for salvation or to trust their government to help them. Two things that are going to do nothing for you. I'm not going to suggest that Wallace was a cult leader. I mean, it's praying, obviously not. But, I don't know. The government does help with shit. I don't know. I'm not anti-government. I'm not suggesting that Wallace was a cult leader, just noting what an effective tool this is for gaining popularity and then using that popularity to gain power.
My power is maximal!
For Wallace, that power came in the form of the 1999 election for state deputy, Brazil's equivalent to a state senator. A few years earlier, he couldn't even get 1,000 votes, but this time he won the election with almost 52,000 votes. Yeah, because now he's popular. Before, his show was like, no one cares. You're like the Ratinho. And I was like, oh my god, dude. You're the guy who filmed those dead bodies with the bullet holes on and we got to watch it while we're eating lunch? Yes, you're the guy! It was the most votes ever received by a state deputy in Manaus and the highest percentage of votes received by any state deputy in all of Brazil. He'd go on to win re-election with record-breaking numbers 2 more times, serving until October of 2009. I get the feeling October of 2009, because we mentioned that date twice now. That's a bad year for whatever his name is, Wallace. But despite being a member of government now and having all sorts of official duties to attend to, Wallace continued to host Canal Livre. The show had grown to the point that they had multiple field reporters, but Wallace still wanted to be in the studio, even if he wasn't the one personally investigating the crimes. Usually he was in the studio at least, though his brother Carlos would also act as host of the show. They had another brother, Fausto, who was one of the field reporters, a sister who I don't believe was involved in the production at all, and there had been one other sibling, Ulysses, though he never appeared on the show. Ulysses was ostensibly the reason it existed at all. He'd been a drug addict and died from a drug overdose. This was a major catalyst for Wallace wanting to clean up Manaus and save the people from the criminals that had taken over their city. Drugs made him extremely angry, something he was very vocal about on the air. He made it clear that drug dealers were a scourge and that the only way they could be effectively dealt with was by killing them. Oh, he's going to do some like Batman shit. The exact words in an episode of Canal Livre were that drug dealers could only be stopped by a bullet and a grave. Dude, this candor is undoubtedly one of the things that made him such an attractive presenter to audiences. And I think my love for the death penalty, people aren't like warmed to me by the fact that I'm like, strap him to the chair! People are mostly like, Simon, be more civilized. Regardless, I don't really think I can emphasize what a ridiculous spectacle Canal Livre was. In one moment, they would be showing footage of a body dead on the ground, blood pouring from its head and soaking the pavement. Then it would suddenly cut to a dance number in the studio. A camera crew zoomed in on the asses of girls dancing in skirts that were so short they may as well not have existed in the first place. Much of the audience changed with every episode, but there was one man who was always in the audience. Gil the Pie Man. Although he sat in the front row of the audience, he was actually a cast member of the show. He was also a humorless dick, or at least that was the character he was hired to play. Gil would sit in the audience with a bucket of shvea, a sort of Middle Eastern open-faced meat pie. Other cast members, especially the puppet Galarito, would constantly mock Gil. Usually this consisted of calling him gay, because it was the 1990s. Hey, Gil!
You gay!
And Gil would retaliate by throwing pies in the faces of people who teased him. Sometimes things would get more physical though. In one famous clip that went viral years later, Gil, after being mocked by Galarito, fought his way backstage, tossed the puppeteer over the window through which he had been holding the puppet, and continued to assault him on stage. I'd like to assume this was staged, but Wallace's level of glee watching this unfold made it seem like it may have been ad-libbed. This is so intense. How do you have a TV show like this? Gil may have been the only person in the audience every episode, but he wasn't the only audience member that had been planted there. Sometimes the audience members didn't even know they were plants. In one famously controversial episode, Wallace put a murderer and the mother of his victim in the audience together. What the fuck? Neither was aware of the other's presence until like halfway through the show when it was revealed, just so they could film the resulting interaction, which included other audience members having to prevent the murderer from fleeing and forcing him to the front of the crowd to speak. This is beyond fucked up. What are you doing? There was a mix of true crime podcast, Jerry Springer, and the Carol Burnett show. No idea what that last one is. No, Jerry Springer. Didn't Jerry Springer die recently? And also there was a puppet.
Okay.
Canal Livre won several awards during its run, and Wallace was an incredibly trusted member of the community and the government. Even though he was already at the top of the ratings for afternoon programming, Wallace saw the potential to get even more viewers. He noticed that whenever they showed graphic footage of freshly murdered bodies, the ratings spiked, so they needed to do more of that. This is so fucked up, dude. What the fuck? It's like, we need more gore, real gore. Originally, Wallace just followed the police to crime scenes, or sometimes to raids of drug dens that viewers had sent in anonymous tips about. Before long, the police were the ones calling Wallace to give him tips so that he could bring his camera crew to follow them. Eventually, citizens witnessing crime started calling Canal Livre before even notifying the police, as they trusted Wallace and his show more than they trusted the authorities. Okay, but then, I mean, he's gonna call the authorities, he's just gonna go along with the camera crew. Although I guess it kind of... I'm not against this, to be honest. I think, body cams exist for a reason. Like, it helps keep the police accountable. I think this is probably good. I mean, I don't like the fact... I more just don't like the fact, the statement that it says about society. That people just want to look at bodies being shot up. I find that bizarre. I've talked about it before, but there's a few times, where you're on the internet or probably on Twitter and you're like, oh God, why? And those are things you don't forget. I don't like that. I don't like coming across that stuff. It's weird that people do. But then then doesn't that mean that a lot of people watching this it's so strange to me. There was a police standoff with a man that showed just how much people believed in Wallace. Oh no, he's going to be like, I want to talk to Wallace. The man had taken a hostage he was holding at gunpoint. He was completely surrounded and agreed to turn himself in at the police station, but he refused to let the police enter the house and take him into custody. The man believed that if he did, he would likely be killed by the police on site or possibly in the car on the way to the station. Ah, yes. I don't like it. I wouldn't like to live in a society where you're afraid of the police. Wait, that's more complicated than I just said, isn't it? Isn't it? Because I could be a minority and then it'd be like, fuck. Wow, that's grim. I never thought about it like that. That's really grim. That's really grim. Admittedly, this was a very real concern, as such actions were pretty common. And so the hostage taker made one simple demand. He wanted State Deputy Wallace Souza to be the one to take him to the police station. Wallace was the only one he trusted to take him there safely. Wallace was at home at the time this was happening, but as soon as he got the phone call, he drove down to the location of the incident and traded places with the hostage. They entered the criminal's SUV and began driving off. The car then stopped, and there was the sound of a gunshot. Police took a moment to evaluate the situation and prepare themselves for action, at which point an unharmed Wallace got out of the car and walked toward the police as the SUV drove off. He told police that the guy changed his mind about turning himself in, something that I don't think anybody could have possibly foreseen, especially since it's not like his chances of survival were going to be any higher behind bars than they would be in the back of a police cruiser. All of this was caught on camera by police and reporters, so Wallace immediately went to the studio to start recording his next episode of Canal Livre. Wait, what was the gunshot about? So, sound of a gunshot. So he's just using it to threaten him? No one actually got shot? That's going to be hurt your ears, though, going off inside a car. The footage of him in the hostage situation was shown repeatedly over the next few weeks, not just on his show, but across every channel. He was seen as a hero who risked his own life to save a hostage, many crediting his time on the police force for his ability to remain calm in a dangerous, high-pressure situation. Oddly enough, Wallace's former job as a police officer came up a lot throughout his career, but nobody ever seemed to bring up the crimes for which he was fired. Well, they did, but nobody really cared. Wallace claimed that they were fake charges brought about him after he'd been falsely implicated in a college entrance exam fraud scheme that he was investigating. Okay, I mean, yeah, go for it. Like, people get away with plenty of shit because you're like, oh, you've been convicted? Fake news. Fake news. It's nonsense. Just like Trump is the king of this. Just like keep repeating. Just keep saying that it's not true. Even if it's been proven, you just be like, no, it's not true. It's not true. I deny it. It's not true. It's been proven. No, not to me. Just keep saying no. So it's a strategy that I can't believe actually works. I don't understand how one of those things would result in the other, but people seem to go along with his explanation, so whatever, I guess. Oh, I see. I mean, I would imagine that he was involved, like, people in implementing him, implementing him? Instigating him? What's the right word there? Implicating, right? Implicated. They implicate him in this to damage his credibility in this investigation so that when he's like, yeah, they were doing this college scam thing, that they'll just be like, no, dude, you're corrupt. No one can believe you. Of course, while most people loved him, Wallace was making enemies this entire time as well. He would constantly use his show and his political speeches to disparage fellow politicians who he felt were corrupt, incompetent, or both. He was out there trying to make a difference and help the people of Manaus, while the other elected officials did nothing. As far as I can tell, though, I don't believe the police had an issue with him. He remained friends with his old buddies from the force, so he would receive tips from them before any other media outlet, allowing Canal Livre to always have the first exclusive information about crimes in progress. Oftentimes, Canal Livre's reporters would arrive at a crime scene before the police did, which was certainly noteworthy. As I said, people would report crimes to the show before they reported them to the police, so this wasn't an inconceivable turn of events. However, every now and then, the reporting did give people pause. I mean, police scanners, you can get a police scanner, right? He's running a big TV show. I would assume, rather than the fact that he's out doing these crimes himself or whatever, is that he's got someone on his team with a police scanner, and they're just like, okay, maybe the police need a few minutes to respond, but we're in our van and we're out there already going. But it seems like the police would get there first, right? Even still. But you could be like, oh, maybe the police are slow. Like, in my mind, if I didn't know what was going on here, I'd be like, yeah, of course what do you think is more likely? The police are slow to respond, or the guy who runs the true crime show is murdering people for ratings? Or whatever the fuck he's up to. And there was one famous episode that raised a lot of questions about exactly where Wallace was getting his information. A reporter arrived at the scene of a murder well before the police did. The victim had been burned alive to the point that the body was completely unrecognizable. You wouldn't even have been able to tell whether it was a man or a woman by looking at it. It was a recent murder as well, so recent that you could still see smoke rising from the charred corpse in Canal Livre's footage. The reporter went on to say that the victim was a male, the approximate time of the murder, and that there were no bullet wounds, and that gasoline had been used as an accelerant. Most viewers wouldn't have questioned any of this, as it seemed like standard reporting, but some of the more astute members of the audience began to wonder how the the reporter could have known any of that. And again, in this situation, like what I was saying, no bullet wounds and stuff. So how do you know? The corpse is charred beyond recognition. Like a little bullet hole? Come on. But again, because it seems so insane, you'd just be like, oh, they're just probably guessing. You'd just be like, oh, they're guessing, or they're just making shit up for ratings. It's a... I don't want to say it because it makes, I do a true crime show, but it's a true crime show. It's not court. I mean, sure, the person had been burned alive and the body was still smoking, but not inflamed. So I guess it's reasonably simple to determine an approximate time of death from that. Depending on how fat the person was before being burned, the body could continue to smolder anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours after the flames were extinguished. However, the other details, including the person's sex, were impossible to have known simply by looking at the body. But again, I'd just be like, they're guessing. They're just guessing. They're just guessing because, yeah, the guy's he's not arranging the killings. That would be crazy. While the knowledge the reporter had seemed somewhat suspicious, there was still the possibility that they'd been tipped off by a witness to the murder. Or they're just making stuff up. Do people not consider that? It's a true crime show. It's not court. This happened all the time, though in that case, there would usually be somebody to interview, whereas the body was completely alone in the woods. That doesn't mean somebody didn't call in a tip and then flee the scene so the murderers wouldn't see the witness's face on TV and know who to silence, but it was certainly suspicious. But again, not suspicious enough for you to be like, oh yeah, he's murdering people for ratings. That's just such a high bar to clear. This particular incident, I'm just saying that. People will be like, Simon, we know why you're saying that. We know. So when you do your murdering, people will be like, no. Simon could never. He'd never murder anyone for ratings. That'd be crazy.
So far.
This particular incident was seen as the most concerning and is the most often cited, but it wasn't an isolated incident of Canal Livre's reporters arriving suspiciously early at a crime scene and knowing more than it seemed like should be possible. In one instance, they reported on a drug dealer who had been shot multiple times but was still alive when the Canal Livre crew arrived. Over the course of the next hour, they filmed the man slowly dying, during which time emergency services never showed up, and yes, they aired the footage. Are you insane? I feel like that's a crime. You're not calling an ambulance. You're just filming this dude dying. This is super fucked up. But hey, Wallace was a good guy. He was a champion of the people. He was using both his media fame and his political position to fight against a corrupt and inefficient government that was letting the people of Manaus down. Yeah, also he's filming someone dying. And I get he's a drug dealer, but you shouldn't just let him die. He was cleaning up the streets, and most of the murders they aired on TV were of traffickers and other criminals anyway, so it's not like they even counted as people. I mean, I don't know, human traffickers, kind of like, I don't know, kind of more willing to discount them not as people, but as like monsters wearing skin clothing. But drug dealers just trying to make a living. You know? Maybe he was selling crack or something, but I don't know. I'm way less harsh on drug dealers than I am on fucking people smugglers. Many of the residents of Manaus, probably even most, believed that there was no way such a good person could have been involved in anything nefarious. Even just not calling not calling an ambulance for an hour is that's fucking nefarious, to be honest. Allegations of something nefarious. It began in October of 2008 with what was supposed to be a routine drug raid. Police had been tipped off about a drug den, so they went down with a warrant to search the place and see what was up. And what was up was cocaine. Lots and lots of cocaine. And also weapons, but mostly cocaine. The owner of the house was Marcio Jorge da Costa, better known as Moa. At first, Moa tried to bribe the officers with 10,000 Brazilian reals each to let him go. Going by the exchange rates from 2008, that would be about $5,000 per arresting officer. The police asked where he was going to get so much money, which seemed like a weird question to me. I don't know, even if you're not going to take it, you'd just be like, okay, where are you going to get that money from? Pay us. And then he'd pay you, and then you're like, cool, you're being arrested and all that money's going into evidence. That's what I'd like to see happen. Like, where could the drug dealer being arrested for mountains of cocaine possibly get $5,000 cash from? Yeah. Where are you going to get that sort of money? And the drug dealer's just like, boys? I mean, how much do you think cocaine's worth, dudes? That wasn't his answer, though. No way for some very important people who he assured would pay the bribe. But since he didn't have the cash on hand, Mo was arrested and taken down to the station instead. Or maybe because they were officers of the law and that was the right thing to do, but the Brazilian police force is notoriously full of corruption, so it's reasonable to suspect that it was just because he didn't have the cash. It's like, no, we'd have accepted the bribe, you just do it on you. Go down to the station until you can get the money together, and then you can go free, you piece of shit. Thank you for the money, by the way. Love you. Ma certainly would have known about police corruption as well, seeing as he'd been a former member of the military police. In Brazil, there are the civil police who investigate crimes after they happen, and the military police who patrol the streets as visibly as possible to prevent crime from happening. Oh, okay. I just assumed he was like, the military police, like the police of people in the military. Basically, they are meant to be the big, scary deterrent for any would-be criminals. Ma ultimately got fired from their job after being implicated in a homicide for the 9th time! Bro, where there's smoke, there's fire, my dude. What? Because murdering 8 civilians as a police officer was fine, but 9 matches is just a step too far. You can't have police officers running around who have double-digit kill counts, so 9 murders was the hard line for dismissal, I guess. I found zero official justification for how this situation was possible. Oh my god, that's insane. And this is 2008. It's a while ago, but this is like still 21st century shit. Anyway, throughout the early hours of his detainment, Mo remained convinced that his unnamed benefactor was going to swoop in at any moment and save the day. Once this didn't happen, he was officially arrested and charged with possession of illegal drugs and weapons. Unlike in the US, where you could be held in jail for up to a year or so, these charges meant it was time for Mo to go directly to prison and await trial, and he was not having any of it. Part of it would be the fact that as a former cop, he would naturally be the target of violence, especially if he was housed in the same facility as people he had put behind bars. Yeah, I mean, look, I get that cops go to prison. I don't think they should be put in the same prison. They should be like, I don't know, like where they put all the sick like, I mean, not in the same place, but they should have like a segregated place for them so they don't like get stabbed up, right? At least the police officers. Don't know how I feel about the sick but like, I don't know, if you've not been sentenced to death, you shouldn't be murdered in prison. Like, this guy's just dealing coke or whatever. He doesn't deserve to get stabbed in the showers. But there was more to it than that. Mo was 100% convinced that if he was put into prison, he was going to be murdered. But there was still the matter of his boss, the powerful man he previously thought was going to protect him. In exchange for being kept safe and away from the rest of the prison population, Mo said that he would tell them absolutely everything. It was the sort of deal that the police are pretty much obliged to accept. After all, if it turned out that Mo was lying, they could just throw the wolves after him anyway. But they were not prepared for what he was going to tell them. Oh, holy shit, is his boss Wallace?
Yep.
Is he doing crimes for Wallace? Oh, he was an ex-police officer as well. They probably know each other somehow. Oh my god, this is fucked up. And they know. Wallace would know about his 9 alleged incidents of civilian murder. Oh my god, it's all coming together. Moa told of a meeting that took place in his boss's house with his fellow conspirators. They had been directly ordered to go into Manaus and wreak havoc, break store windows, destroy bus signs, commit robberies, even commit murder. And they were meant to cause as much crime and chaos as possible, with murder having been explicitly ordered. It will come as no surprise to anyone who read the title of today's episode, but Moa's boss was none other than Wallace Souza. Yes, it was like, Kevin's like, dude, it's extremely obvious. And I'm like, I was still proud of myself for getting it, Kevster. Or so Moa claimed, at least. He said Wallace had hired him as a bodyguard, and that it was he and his fellow bodyguards that had been ordered to commit violent crimes. The goal was allegedly to undermine any efforts being made by the government to clean up the city, giving more weight to Wallace's constant talk of corruption and inefficiency. By this point, over a decade after the start of Canal Livre, some members of the police had already begun to grow suspicious of the show. According to Moa, the reason Wallace knew where and when to send his reporters was because he was the one orchestrating the crimes that they reported on. I don't believe the reporters were claimed to have had any knowledge of what was going on, and the inexplicable details they possessed had been fed directly to them by Wallace, which you've got to be suspicious of. Because they'd be like, yeah, you're going to go to there's going to be someone burning, they're going to be a woman, they're going to be shot in the face. They're not going to have been shot. This kind of stuff is like, how do you know that, Wallace? I've not even been there yet. Aren't I the one supposed to be reporting on it? How do you have this information? But when you're like, this is a good job, you just be like, shut up, there's probably a good explanation, right? If I don't know, I don't know. For example, Wallace might send a reporter out to do a story about a busted water main, but then they would get an update. It would turn out that a murder had very coincidentally just been committed in the immediate area where the reporter happened to be already, so they would move to go and cover that story instead. When confronted with these allegations, Wallace's response was totally predictable. He claimed to have never met Moa before in his life and said that the allegations were all a conspiracy from his political rivals. I mean, yeah, solid response, because it does seem insane, doesn't it? And hey, maybe that was the case. It's not like there were any official payroll records of Moa having worked for Wallace, so maybe he really had made it all up. Clearly, one of the two was lying, and there was no way for police to be sure which one was the liar. But you'd instantly go to Moa, the guy they found with kilos of cocaine, or however much it was, and was offering bribes to the cops. And the other guy's a respected television dude and senator of some kind. You'd be like, well, of course the criminal's lying. He's just trying to get out of shit. Wallace continued to make speeches at the legislature about how he was innocent, and all of this was a conspiracy. It pissed off too many people by calling them incompetent and worked too hard to root out corruption, and now those people wanted their revenge. Things only became more complicated when Moa's wife Mary came forward. According to Mary, everything Moa said was a lie. She said she'd spoken to Moa, and he claimed that he was tortured by the police until he signed the incriminating statement without even reading it. The man who tortured him had allegedly been Thomas Vasconcelos, the Amazonas' Secretary of Intelligence, who was also leading the task force investigating Wallace. Personally, I think that little detail was stretching the bounds of credibility a bit too far, but that's just me. Anyway, after this happened, Moa recanted his statement and said that yes, it was all a lie, and that he had been tortured into incriminating Wallace. He alleged that the police had not only beaten and tortured him, but threatened to murder him if he didn't sign the statements. Dude has been, like, Wallace has got to him, right? Because he's turning on Wallace, and now he's like, no, it's all a lie. Wallace got to him. Because Wallace is very powerful and rich. Furthermore, he said that Wallace was telling the truth, and the two men had never even met one another. Shortly after this, anonymous packages arrived at multiple newspapers containing a copy of this picture, which I've got here, and you'll see on screen. And I guess there's these two bros just hanging out together in a pool. It's these two dudes, right? In a dolphin-themed pool. Oh, great stuff. That's Wallace on the left and Moa on the right, hanging out together at the pool at Wallace's house, which meant clearly he was lying about never having met Moa before in his life. But he had a perfectly good reason for that. According to Wallace, he had no idea this guy went by Moa. As far as he knew, the guy's name was Jorge. And it wasn't his bodyguard, it was his son Raphael's jiu-jitsu teacher. Wait, why would he think it was his bodyguard? Wallace had invited him to a barbecue at the house, and they just happened to take a swim together. Okay, so that was a perfectly reasonable answer, and the one the police definitely believed. After all, what TV celebrity and politician wouldn't invite their kid's jiu-jitsu teacher to a family barbecue? I don't know, maybe they just hit it off. Like, is that so weird? Like, I don't know, I'm a parent, you go places and you're kind of sitting there, it's boring, and you talk to the other adults. Maybe you make a friend and you're like, dude, we're having a barbecue this weekend, come on round. I don't think that's so strange. You're just stuck there with the other parents. Of course you're going to talk to them, you're like, hey, what's up? What are you doing here? Which one's yours? Are they any good at this shit? Do you enjoy it? Are you as bored as me right now? But back here in the real world, where that story is highly dubious at best, the police didn't buy it for a second. It didn't help that Moa claimed the photo was a fake, which is why police made sure to keep suspects isolated from one another when taking statements. Have you seen this? I think it was on Reddit or something, or maybe I saw it on Twitter, where it's like, it was obviously a fake advert, but it was selling like a fake finger that you wear on your hand, so that when you're out doing crimes, you just wear this fake finger. And then, because you know when an AI generates an image, it's not very good at fingers. So someone will take a photo of you do your crimes, and you're wearing this fake finger, and you'll be like, that's clearly AI. I've got 7 fingers. I've got, how many fingers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plus the extra one, that's 6. You got 6 fingers. I've got 6 fingers in that picture. That's not me. That's made by Midjourney. There was no way for the two to get their story straight with Moa behind bars, so when Wallace went from Moa never heard of him to, oh, that guy, I thought his name was Jorge, that was at least vaguely plausible. But for Wallace to admit having met him in person and they took a swim together, only for Moa to say that they'd never met and the picture was fake, the whole situation was more of a clusterfuck than an episode of Canal Livre, but without the booty dancing. To make matters even more confusing, Mary came forward to retract the statement that had caused Moa to retract his statement. Now she was claiming that her first stop after finding out that Moa was arrested was Wallace's house. She went to see if he would pay for a lawyer for him, but that Wallace said he couldn't because of all the incriminating things Moa had said. It's gonna look bad. It's gonna look bad. According to Mary, Wallace offered to hire a lawyer for Moa if she could get him to retract his statement and say that he was tortured into making it. It was clear from these new claims that Mary had been lying with one of her statements, but which one? Were there two different stories because she and Moa were afraid of what the police would do to them, or because they were afraid of what Wallace and his associates would do to them? Honestly, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I'd be both afraid of Wallace and afraid of the police. One clearly not above murder, allegedly. So far, probably proven later in today's episode, but we'll just throw in an allegedly just in case right now. And the police, who will put you in prison.
Right to jail.
It's not a good situation to be in, is it? Maybe just stay out of crime. Maybe just don't be criminals. Maybe just don't marry criminals. Done. Fortunately for the task force, they didn't have to rely solely on the self-contradictory statements from Moa and Mary. There were other witness statements from Wallace's associates, financial records that allegedly linked him to organized crime, and most importantly, phone calls recorded from wiretaps. Unfortunately, none of those things are publicly available as far as I can tell, but it was more than enough evidence to have the task force convinced that Wallace was a violent and dangerous criminal. Okay, there we go. Like, did I find it weird that he invites his jiu-jitsu teacher over for, like, a barbecue? Not particularly. Did I find it, but the wiretaps and all this stuff, is that evidence? Hell yes. Do I think he's guilty? Since the beginning. There was just one problem, though. Well, there are actually a couple. One was all the threats of violence against members of the task force. They were being followed home on a daily basis and receiving death threats around the clock, so they needed to hire security guards for their own protection. It was believed that people following them were on Wallace's payroll, though I don't know if this was ever proven. I mean, who else? They also thought Moa's life was in danger as well. Although he was in prison, he had received police protection and was separated from all the other inmates. That makes a hell of a lot of sense. One, because he's previously a cop, and two, because Wallace is a dangerous criminal. Like, I've seen Breaking Bad, that episode where they have all the watches synchronized and they murder. They get like so many people killed in prison. I'm like, God damn. That was the moment where it's like, holy I mean, there's lots of like holy moments in Breaking Bad, like I am the danger and whatnot. But that one where they're murdering the people in the prison, just having so many people killed in prison, is just like, fucking hell. Jesus. He is the danger.
I am the danger.
One day, however, there was an explosion at the prison. It was assumed that this was a bomb planted by Wallace's associates and meant to take out Moa so that he couldn't testify if the case went to trial. But it turned out to be a false alarm. I mean, it was a very real explosion. It was just an accident. The police had improperly stored some confiscated explosives and they wound up going off. Why are they storing confiscated explosives at a prison? Dispose of them. But the biggest problem was that how did explosives get in a prison in the first place? Someone's like tucking them up in their prison wallets, which is a phrase I learned the other day, and taking them in. What the fuck? But the biggest problem was that little qualifier I had to put in that sentence, if the case ever went to trial. In a case where someone was accused of murder, and that accusation was backed up by a mountain of evidence, you'd assume that the only way the case wouldn't go to trial is if the person died or pled guilty. Exactly. As it turns out, however, there was no way to charge Wallace. Ooh, okay. Oh no, he's a politician. I know some countries give politicians immunity from certain things, but usually it's in the course of their duty, no? And I don't think this is in the course of political duty. Let's see. Maybe Brazil extends it a bit further. Here we go. Members of the Brazilian government enjoy a little thing called parliamentary immunity. This type of immunity is pretty common all throughout the world, but it's typically a form of qualified immunity. There we go. That's what I mean, like qualified, like in the course of duty or whatever. In most countries, those with parliamentary immunity can't be charged with any crime related to their official duties in office. Which makes sense. It's like how if a cop goes undercover in a biker gang, they can't be prosecuted for doing coke or committing vandalism with other bikers. This is basically just the white-collar version of that. This makes perfect sense. In Brazil, however, parliamentary immunity doesn't only protect a person for crimes allegedly committed in pursuance of their official duties, they're fully shielded from prosecution for any and all crimes they might commit, up to and including murder. Wait, do they have like diplomatic immunity in their own country? Not even diplomatic immunity goes that far. It's qualified immunity. Unless they are literally caught in the act, so no killing people in public. Which is another thing, like diplomatic immunity doesn't extend. You can be arrested as a diplomat if you're a danger to the public, I think. That is insane, but the police weren't actually allowed to pursue Wallace. His son, on the other hand, did not have immunity. Raphael had been implicated in the crimes as well, which meant police were able to obtain a search warrant for his home. And wouldn't you know it, Raphael was still living with dear old dad, which meant that through the power of loopholes, the police were able to get a warrant for Wallace's home. Interesting. So they don't enjoy freedom from search on their homes are not immune from police intervention or whatever, which I think is different for diplomatic immunity. They can't search your property. Things were moving very quickly in the case, especially given how high profile Wallace was. Murr was arrested and made his statement in October of 2008, and in April of 2009, the Souza house was searched by police. Because warrants have to be specific, the search was largely limited to Raphael's bedroom and his car, but there was still plenty for police to find. The car was searched first, and inside it they found 380 pistol magazines. Wait, not rounds? Magazines, which is just excessive. Even if you're a contract killer, there's no need to have that much ammo readily available in your car at any given time. Depending on the size of the mags, it would come out to anywhere from between 5,700 bullets to over 11,000, which is beyond unnecessary. Yes, dude, why do you have so many magazines? Anyway, there was plenty to find in Raphael's room as well. There were plenty of guns in his room, not a surprise, along with more ammunition. There was also the equivalent of around $100,000 in cash, which made for a great photo op. It's a shame they didn't include all the ammo from Raphael's car in the photo as well, but I guess the money is more exciting to viewers. I don't know, all of that, and $100,000, no offense, it's not that much money. Like, I mean, sorry, it's obviously a lot of money, but like, in physical, I guess it's not going to be dollars. It's going to be in like Brazilian reals or whatever. But like $100,000 is probably only like that high, that big of a stack. What? 20 centimeters? 9 inches? 6 inches? How big is that? Like half a ruler? 6 inches of $100 bills stacked up. It's not that much money. It's just been like a little pile on the table. Although in Brazilian reals, it looks like a lot more. Look at that. Oh my god, it's a lot more money in Brazilian reals. That's certainly something suspicious to keep lying around the house, but rich people have cash on hand, and it's not the craziest thing in the world. No, that's true. Like, people keep cash for, like, emergencies and such things. Far more concerning was a list of names in Raphael's room. All of the people on the list were drug dealers, some of whom had already been killed. There was a lot of guns as well, although that isn't inherently incriminating. Given the situation as a whole, though, especially the witness testimony the task force had already collected, this all looked really bad. The other rather concerning piece of evidence was a number of spent bullets, not bullet casings, the actual bullets. What? They're digging the bullets at what? That's weird, to say the least. The first time I ever got to fire a gun, I kept one of the spent casings because I was a relatively little kid and it seemed cool at the time. Yeah, I used to have a few bullet casings from guns that I'd shot, especially like if it was a really big gun. You got like a big old casing. For someone who had thousands of bullets in his possession, however, I find it hard to believe that Raphael would have still had some childish, sentimental connection to every single shot he ever fired. It was the opinion of the task force that these were bullets that had murdered drug dealers around Manaus and had been retrieved to prevent them being collected as evidence. Allegedly, Wallace attempted to bribe the police, then threatened them by claiming that he was going to become the new Secretary for Security. If that were true, the position would give him a lot of power over the police. It wouldn't give him direct control over the officers, but it would give him control over their resources, and maybe he would think Manaus Police Department didn't need any funding for their payroll until the officers that raided his house were fired. Oh my god, that's so corrupt. Jesus Christ. There is no evidence that Wallace made the reported bribe or vague threat, but even if he did, it didn't take. Raphael admitted to being the owner of the items the police searched, and he was arrested. Wait, what are they arresting him for? He's got, I guess, like, he's got guns, he's got lots of money. Oh, he's got the list of murders. Forgot about the list of murders. Okay. According to one of the officers at the scene, Wallace appeared to be physically crushed by seeing his son arrested. Although Wallace remained popular among the voting public, his support from his fellow legislators began to wane over the months that followed. Either they really were all part of the conspiracy against him, or it was just too much evidence against Wallace. In either case, they decided that it was time for him to stand trial for what he was alleged to have done, which meant that they had to remove the parliamentary immunity that was shielding him from prosecution. Oh, okay. So they can take this away. So he'd kind of have like a Putin situation where it's like, if you leave power, someone's going to kill you. And it's like, if he leaves power, he's not going to have his immunity anymore, and they can pursue him for crimes that he did when he had immunity. Interesting. On October the 1st, 2009, Wallace was impeached and removed from office. The vote to do so wasn't unanimous, but it wasn't close either. A warrant was issued for his arrest almost immediately, and so for 4 days, Wallace went on the run. Roadblocks were set up to block all the ports out of Manaus, and a manhunt ensued to track down the former state deputy. If he doesn't manage to escape, I'll be quite surprised. Like, he's on the run for 4 days. He's rich. He's powerful. How do you not have an escape plan? How do you not have a go bag filled with money and a place where you know you can bribe a pilot to take you to a non-extradition country? What's wrong with you? Come on. Come on. You're doing crimes and you're rich. What are you doing? There were numerous raids attempting but failing to find him, and after 4 days, Wallace finally turned himself in. Well, that's how it's worded in a lot of reporting anyway. What actually happened was they found him hiding out at a friend's house, and he agreed to go with them voluntarily so long as he was held in a separate cell, far away from anyone he'd helped put behind bars. But since he wasn't dragged kicking and screaming, semantically, that counts as him turning himself in. No, it doesn't. They found him. And then he was like, can I go in a prison without all my enemies? And they'll be like, yeah, right, mate. We don't want you killed. And then he'll be like, okay, cool. I'll come with you. They found him. They captured him. Credit to the police. I quite like the police in this episode. I mean, I understand there's loads of bribery going on and stuff, but it seems like the police that we're encountering in today's episode are not taking those bribes. They're doing their job. I like it. Rare praise for the police. With both Wallace and Raphael behind bars, along with a number of alleged conspirators, all that was left to do was hold everybody accountable for their crimes. So let's see how well that actually worked out. Seeking justice. The first to go to trial was Wallace Souza himself. Unfortunately, there would be no conclusion to this trial. Wallace had suffered from numerous illnesses throughout his entire life, and his failing organs had no interest in cooperating with the state's desire for a jury trial. Wallace's health had been a topic of concern even before he was arrested. He was hospitalized back when he was facing impeachment, which should have caused him to miss the ethics committee hearing against him. The committee offered Wallace the opportunity to make an official statement from the hospital, but ever the showman, he instead demanded to be wheeled into the ethics committee on a stretcher so that he could speak in person. Many people thought that this public spectacle was an attempt to garner sympathy. I'm sure that was part of it, but I suspect it had more to do with his ego and his love of sensationalism than anything else. Besides, we already know that he was successfully impeached, so even if it made the public more sympathetic towards him, it didn't save him from prosecution. Less than a month after being arrested, Wallace was transferred from prison to the hospital, as he again needed treatment. He remained there for months until he was released in February of 2010 to be placed under house arrest. A month later, he again needed to be hospitalized, this time being transferred to a hospital in Sao Paulo. Wallace suffered from a rare condition known as Budd-Chiari syndrome. I have never heard of this. It only affects 1 in a million people, and it's characterized by blockages in the veins that drain the liver. God, a curious thing. The most common symptoms are fluid buildup in the abdomen, abdominal pain, and an enlarged liver. There's a wide range of other symptoms as well, especially because Budd-Chiari syndrome is usually caused by some other underlying chronic condition. Because of the variety of symptoms and underlying comorbidities, there isn't any definitive research on how deadly the condition is or the average life expectancy of people suffering from it. Yeah, it's a 1 in a million thing caused by which is caused by underlying conditions. I mean, good luck working that out, scientists. For Wallace, though, that life expectancy would be 51 years. A few months after being transferred to Sao Paulo for treatment, he experienced complications in his lungs and kidneys. He had to be moved to intensive care, where he was placed in an induced coma and put on a ventilator. 2 months later, while awaiting a procedure to drain fluid from his abdomen, he suffered a heart attack and died. Wallace may have never had his day in court, but there were plenty of other people involved with Canal Livre that were implicated in the crimes alongside Wallace. The task force had put together a 500-page report detailing all of the accusations and evidence they had, and they intended to put Moa, Raphael, and several others involved with Wallace behind bars. But while the task force felt that they had a mountain of evidence, they didn't really have any physical evidence. Oh no. Wait, what about the bullets from the bodies and the list of names? And I don't know, surely there's more. Really? Raphael claimed that his spent bullets were from a shooting range, which seems less plausible. Somewhat. But also, I mean, spent bullets from a shooting range are going to be much easier to recover in, like the sandbank behind the range, or like in the grass or whatever, or in the hay bale that you're shooting into or whatever people shoot into, rather than a body. As for the papers they found, Raphael said that those were notes from a conversation with his lawyer. He hadn't been violating the first rule of the casual criminalist in writing down his crimes. He'd been writing down the crimes his lawyer said Moa had been accused of, so he knew what allegations to defend himself against. Not bad, mate. Not bad. I like that. While I personally don't believe that, it's definitely logical enough to establish reasonable doubt in jurors. Yes, whoever your lawyer is, very impressive. That's what money gets you. Some good-ass lawyer who finds those little things and will get you off. Money for lawyers. It's money well spent. Rule whatever. In a search for more physical evidence, police exhumed the body of a murder suspect believed to have been one of Wallace's victims. The bullets inside the body matched the spent bullets found in Raphael's room. Well, that's the physical evidence you need, isn't it? Let's go! Though the extent to which they matched is unclear. Also, isn't bullet matching? I thought this was kind of debunked as like bad science. Wait, is that bullet matching where they, like, you know on CSI where they're like, they line up the bullets in that, like, they got the microscope and they got the two bullets and they're like matching them up and they're like, the striations match. As I understood, that's not good science anymore. Not sure about that. If they could use the markings to prove they were fired by the same gun, that would be huge, but it seems like all they could do was match them as being the same type of ammo, which is basically meaningless, yes. That was it for the physical evidence, which, well, okay, there we go. It's pretty well like the two things I brought up and the two things that his lawyer are just like, boom, bada boom, boom, boom. Out you go, you're a free man, Rafa. Which meant that most of the other evidence they had was witness testimony. And this proved rather problematic, as the majority of witnesses to the crimes were all drug dealers and other criminals. Seeing as Wallace had built his career on trying to clean up Manaus and put these people behind bars, they certainly would have a reason to lie and say that he was behind the murders. Yes. Oh God, Raphael's going free, isn't he? And old Wallace died before he could face justice. It's going to be a very unsatisfying ending, isn't it? Because of this, one of the prosecution's star witnesses in the case was Giselle Vaz, a reporter for Canal Livre. According to Giselle, she had recognized for a while that something untoward was happening. If she was sent to go film a drug raid and the police didn't find any drugs, she would watch as they retrieved drugs from their cars to plant them and continue the raid. Oh my God, she was then to report on the scene as if the drugs had been there all along. Look, drugs! Giselle also claimed to have been in the room when Wallace ordered the murder of Jeza Fraxi, the federal judge that was heading up the case. The testimony was pivotal, as she was an honest citizen with inside knowledge of Wallace's activities, and she was directly claiming that he had ordered murders. However, Giselle also stated that she had been threatened by the task force with jail time if she didn't say all of this. So, that's not great. It doesn't mean that nothing she said was true, but that's the sort of thing that still looks really bad to a jury. The other star witness was Moa, the one who was responsible for the entire investigation beginning in the first place. He had made incredibly damaging statements and then retracted them, so everyone was waiting to see what he would say on the stand. Of course, seeing as he was implicated in these crimes as well, the answer should have been obvious. Moa denied ever meeting Wallace or having any involvement with him, and he stuck to this story that he had been beaten and tortured by the police when making those statements. Even though we know that's at least partially a lie because of the picture of them together, that was Moa's official testimony under oath. With all the other witnesses either being criminals or admitting to having been coerced by the task force, the defense must have felt Moa going against his original accusations against Wallace was his best chance of acquittal. Yeah, and it ain't bad. Because if he's like, oh no, it was all true, then you're screwed. You got to go against it. And saying like throwing in a little bit of police torture and beating, yeah, yeah. It's just going to sweeten the pie with the juries for getting you off. Let's go. I mean, I don't like it, but I like the clever lawyering. And it worked. Everyone that had been arrested for the murders alleged to have been orchestrated by Wallace was found not guilty. Everybody except one person, that is. Moa still had to go back to prison, what with mountains of cocaine they found in his house and all. But he wasn't the one convicted of murder. That was Raphael, or the son. The man they had allegedly tried to hire to murder Judge Fraxo was Luis João Macedo de Souza, also known as Luis Pulga. Regardless of whether or not it was true that they tried to hire Luis for the murder, Luis was gunned down after the meeting allegedly took place. The reasoning given was that he had either refused to murder the judge or gotten cold feet, and so he had to be eliminated as a witness. Fun fact, he was not the only witness eliminated in this fashion. One person came to the police saying that they had witnessed Wallace's goons commit murder, and a couple of days later that person was gunned down and thus unable to testify. I mean, yeah, this is some like really hardcore criminal shit. Raphael was found guilty of the murder of Luis and possession of illegal weapons, which was a much more straightforward case, and he was sentenced to 9 years in prison in 2012. For murder? And having like thousands of rounds of ammunition in your house? Oh God. He had remained in custody since his arrest in 2009, so in 2015 he was released on parole after serving 6 years. For murder? I realise that the American legal system is often seen as a bit draconian by other nations, a little bit, but surely we can agree someone who's convicted of murder shouldn't be eligible for parole after only 6 years. I mean, hell, forget parole, the sentence of 9 years feels extremely lenient for murder. You and I, Kevin, same page. Maybe that's just my American sensibilities talking, but it feels like, well, I'd say it feels like Raphael got away with murder, but he was convicted of murder, so by definition that's incorrect. But you know what I mean, though. He got away with serving serious time, didn't he? I mean, 6 years is serious time, but like not for murder. If this is in America, it'd be like life without parole, boy, or yeah, stick that needler in your arm there, champ. Aftermath and the new generation. This case has been highly controversial, in no small part thanks to how it was covered. All of the reporting, and most of my sarcastic asides, treated the task force finding as fact, which led to widespread belief, of course, that Wallace was guilty. It wasn't until a Netflix documentary on the case a few years ago that the other side of the story was shared in any meaningful detail. It was always reported that Wallace claimed to be the target of a conspiracy, but nobody was given any real reason to believe it possibly could have been true. It can't be understated how many enemies Wallace had made, though, including both politicians and the crime families of Manaus. Even though the majority of people loved him, he still felt he had to drive around in a bulletproof car. Oh, and while I mostly talked about his political enemies being the result of him calling others inept and corrupt, it went much deeper than just name-calling. For example, Wallace accused the mayor in one of the cities of Amazonas of embezzling money, a crime he allegedly would have been familiar with from his days as a police officer. Allegedly. Not only did an investigation prove that the mayor was embezzling, but it was also discovered that he was a habitual sex offender who preyed on young girls in the city that he was the mayor of. Oh, what the... Wallace, in this case, legend. If the politicians were all as corrupt as Wallace claimed, seeing him willing to hold them accountable for their crimes would certainly put a target on his back. Organized crime also spiked following Wallace's death, which suggests that his activities really were hindering crime in Manaus, giving them a reason to plot against him. In particular, was the family of the North, a gang he had targeted and spoken out against repeatedly. With Wallace out of the way, the family of the North became more powerful and more organized than they'd ever been. The family of the North sounds like a weird 90s pop group. Not a terrifying Brazilian gang. Before we tie up the last couple of loose ends in this episode, Simon, I want to pass the question off to you. Do you think Wallace was guilty? Or do you think there really was a conspiracy to remove him from the equation? Oh my god, now I don't know. Like, I know he had enemies and stuff, and there was not really any evidence against him. I have to say, I don't know. I really don't know. It does seem like a big stretch, doesn't it? It does seem like a really big stretch. It does feel more likely, and I'm not the one to jump towards conspiracies, but I would just call this more like corruption. I think if he was fighting anti-corruption and those people who he was fighting didn't want him around, I think they'd take care of him. I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think it's possibly even more likely. Maybe I think it's more likely that he's the victim of a conspiracy. And I'm not the conspiracy guy. I make a whole channel, Decoding the Unknown, if you want to check it out, about how conspiracies are most often untrue. But this one, something to it. It's like the JFK one. It's like there's something weird going on here. This isn't the whole story. If either story was presented as a movie plot, it would probably be thrown away for being too unrealistic. But one of them has to be the truth. And there's a reasonable argument for each side. Personally, I believe that Wallace was guilty and that Moe's original statement was the truth. Wallace had some dangerous enemies, and with good reason. But the extent of the conspiracy would need to be impossibly far-reaching in order for it to be true. How so? It would need to include the crime families, members of government, local and federal police, and local and federal judges in order to work. I don't think it needs to include the crime families. The crime families could just benefit from it, right? He's got enemies, members of government. Definitely think that's possible. Local and federal police, local federal judges. It is quite wide-ranging, isn't it? It does have to be quite big, even discounting the crime families. Oh God, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. The scope just seems too broad, when a much more simple explanation was that Wallace was trying to be a net positive for Manaus with a by-any-means-necessary mentality. It will be interesting to see where you and the people of the comments land, as the people of Manaus are extremely divided into what they believe is true. That all said, though, when I originally pitched this script, I told Simon it would be a short episode, but we're probably pushing around 67 minutes or so right now, so let me finish up by tying up some loose ends, one of which was going to be tied up with extreme prejudice. I think we're over 67 minutes, to be honest. I stopped the recording halfway, changed my shirt because it's a new day, right? But I don't know how much I recorded yesterday, but it's more than 67 minutes, Kevster, I think, even with the edit. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I underestimated how much I did yesterday. Oh my God, no one cares. Just get on with it, Simon. Why are you saying this? Fast forward to New Year's Day 2017 at the Anísio Jobim Penitentiary, Jobim I guess that would be in Portuguese, penitentiary complex. It was shortly before Moa was set to be released from prison, and Mary, wait, didn't we say he was released in 2015? No, that was Raphael. That was the other guy, sorry. It was shortly before Moa set to be released from prison, and Mary had come to see him that day so they could start planning for their life once he was a free man again. But he'd never get the chance. There was a riot and subsequent massacre in the prison orchestrated by the family of the North. Oh no, the 90s pop band, what are you doing? In total, 56 inmates were murdered. Some were decapitated or dismembered, while Moa was burned alive in his cell. If there was ever going to be somebody that both knew and was willing to share the truth about Wallace Souza, that opportunity most likely died with Moa. Oh, dude, that'd suck. It's like, yes, finally getting out of prison. Oh, no, not a riot today. No, don't set me on fire. And yet the story is far from over because there's still one character I haven't introduced yet. Kevin, we're like 4 paragraphs away from the end of the episode. We talked about Wallace's son, Raphael, but he had a younger son, Willis. Willis was only 14 when his father died, so even if his father was guilty, it's unlikely he would have known anything that was going on. Willis had always maintained his father's innocence, saying that the mere notion that a person would commit murder just for TV ratings was insane. It's kind of insane. I said it earlier, it is insane. He truly believed everything his father had done, so he sought to follow in his father's footsteps. The main goal was to do so politically, but his 2018 run for Congress failed. However, while the people may not have been ready to elect Willis into office yet, they did want him to become a broadcaster just like his father had been. At first, Willis was unconvinced. He began doing the same sorts of investigative journalism that his father had done back on Livre and uploading the videos to Facebook. People loved it and they wanted more, but in a 2019 interview with 60 Minutes Australia, he said that he didn't really think he was ready to be a broadcaster. At the time, it seemed unclear if Willis was ever going to make the shift to traditional media, but as of 2021, Canal Livre is back on the air and hosted by Wallace Souza. No shot! What an ending! For the most part, anyway, the show goes now by the name of Canal Livre, or Free Signal, but it uses the same logo and font and everything and is considered to be a continuation of the original show. Canal Livre is much closer in style to the original show, featuring journalism, public interest stories, and like 1,000 ads in each hour-long show. Oh my god, television in the past is... I fucking love how we don't have to watch adverts in TV anymore. At least I don't. I don't have a TV subscription. I don't have a TV, like, broadcast TV. I just have all of the subscription services. Or, like, I don't know, 6 of them, or however many it is. And it's like, no adverts. Mwah, love it. It doesn't feature any of the over-the-top sensationalism and frantic chaos of Canal Livre. The only quirky element of the show right now is an MC who introduces Willis while wearing a suit, tie, and a Daft Punk-style helmet.
Wallace Souza.
Which sounds kind of cool. We're just going to have to wait and see if Willis continues to run the show the way he has for the past 3 years, or if he will follow in his father's footsteps and alter the show in an effort to chase higher ratings. Should that happen, though, I suspect Canal Livre will be under intense scrutiny from authorities who want to make sure that Willis doesn't turn into his father. Allegedly. And that's where we end today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. This is entertaining. I liked it. If you like the show, leave us a rating on Spotify. Or a comment or a like on YouTube, wherever you're watching this or listening to this. Thank you. Bye for now.